that time when there's a lot of remembering going on, and rightly so. We're thinking about 100 years since the end of the First World War, and then we're remembering all those who've died in that war and every subsequent one, and that's a good thing to do. My grandfather was killed in the First World War, and my two sons and I went out on the 100th anniversary of his death 2 years ago to visit his grave. My father was killed in the Second World War. He was aircrew on Lancaster bombers. It's good to remember those who have fallen. It's good for us too as Christians to remember the martyrs who've gone before us to gain us the freedoms that we have. Because the church has a history of men and women laying their lives down for the truth. It's good to remember them. The writer of Hebrews gives us that whole chapter of the heroes of faith, speaks of those who overcame, who gained victories, who quenched fire, who shut the mouths of lions. But then he speaks also of those who died, those who were sawn asunder, those who didn't receive their dead back to life again. There's always been a price to pay for liberty and for freedom. I remember some years ago now watching a program called Antiques Roadshow, and I think it was coming from Norfolk somewhere, and at the end of the show the presenter stood in front of the camera with a piece of charred wood in his hands, and he said, "This piece of wood is all that remains of the stake at which the first Protestant martyr in England was burned." And at that moment I was greatly moved and did something rather unusual. I reached out and I touched the television screen where the piece of wood was, and I said, "Thank you," because I recognize that the liberties and the freedoms that we enjoy were bought at great price by men and women who were prepared to die for their faith. And now we live in an age which for many years has been free, but now is facing a real clampdown on the freedom of speech, on our ability to preach the whole counsel of God, because it might offend somebody. But our job is still the same as that of the martyrs. It's still the same as those who laid their life down in sacrifice. Our job is to preach the good news of the gospel, to share the message of the kingdom of God, to preach the whole counsel of God. The gospel is always offensive. It will always offend somebody, but it's also the power of God unto salvation to all who will believe. And it is our responsibility to communicate this good news to everyone, everywhere. It will cost us, but that's always been the way. We will be persecuted, probably, but that has always happened. But the good news is, if we suffer with him, we will also reign with him. If we're despised now, we will share his glory. In this time of memory, in my mind, there's the song that says, "Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. We have good news. Our feet are shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. And our warfare is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in the heavenly places. But it's a war nonetheless, and we must fight it, and we will win.